But anyway, well, welcome to Bases 124. I think you're 124.
Thank you.
And just while we're going on to it, you've got a bit of a sort of a history of hot and strange universe radio, and you do quite a lot of stuff. In fact, I've got it printed out here on old style analog paper. Analog.
Wow. Yeah. Nice.
Sort of paper thing.
Okay.
And you also sent me. You've really done a lot of stuff. You have to tell me what FWGA means.
FWGA.
WWGA.
Oh, it's the Writers Guild of America.
That, of course.
It's the Writers Guild. You have the Writers Guild of America West, which is mostly movies, screenplays, et cetera, when you work in TV. And then you have Writers Guild East, which works mostly with plays.
Naturally. The play.
Exclusively with plays. So, so.
And the SAG, that's what's that?
Screen Actors Guild.
And the AFTA.
That's AFTA stands for the American Federation of Radio and Television Artists. It's the equivalent of your BAFTA.
Oh, right.
Actually, in England, where you have the British Association of Federation of Artists.
I think there's a clue there with the leading letter. Not the A. The A sort of.
Yeah, with the B and all that. So, SAG is Screen Actors Guild. AFTA is Radio Television. Writers Guild is. So the only one I'm not in is the Directors Guild, even though I am a director. But it's very strange to be able to get into the Directors Guild. You need people. I mean, it's very mafia.
You don't have to peel up a.
It's very mafia-like. Directors Guild. So.
Well, there's a lot of titles here. So Sean David Morton, and that's a. The other thing is that you know a friend of mine called Kerry. She does some kind of interview thing.
Yeah, Kerry Cassidy, right?
She saw my work and says, "God damn it, I've got to leave an honest job in Hollywood and follow Miles Johnson out into the mist."
There you go. Go live by the canal, by Love Canal.
Well, actually, let's actually start it. This is actually living colored. This.
Okay.
Now, I shouldn't say it, but when I shot these pictures, MI5 put a couple of planted agents onto this. And you may see a man with a fishing rod on this.
Okay.
And they were wondering, what the hell is he going to do next? What's he doing? So about 4 or 5 agents and people walking around all sort of arrived to sort of disrupt my great background.
Have you been hassled a great deal by MI5?
Yes, I've been defamed, deplatformed. In fact...
welcome to the club.
Yeah. I've been there's lots of things here, but the main thing is, the only thing that's important is that I had these special mugs made.
All right. I made it to Bases 2021. I got it.
With intact DNA.
I see. That's great.
Yeah.
Who's the woman on the bottom?
Oh, I don't know. It was something on the internet. I just
stole
it for a limited edition series mugs. No point having a limited edition mug if people write in and say, could I get one of those? Well, you weren't there and it's not 2021 anymore. So
I have to ask you, why do you name your show Bases?
Well,
are we talking about underground bases or
yes,
or bases of some kind?
Get the phone switched off.
Okay.
We are switched. Listen. This is just in case we couldn't contact each other and then we could phone.
Okay.
Well, I go back to doing UFO stuff when I was at school, and I got the double-page things in Belfast and did all that. But the bottom line is, cutting to the chase, there's a very, very good a bunch of people called London UFO Studies, and they actually did a lot of very good, serious UFO work in the east of London.
Okay.
Whereas the others did a lot of baloney, like the Alien Autopsy and stuff like that. Better not say too much more about that. I'll get sued.
Well, I did. I'm the one that found that and actually worked on it. So.
Oh, well, we could talk about that, but we can't show any pictures.
Well, no, because it's.
Yeah. Well, no. Let's talk about that.
It's all owned by my ex-partner Bob Keviott, because it was. We originally were working for Unsolved Mysteries at the time, which was a big TV show in the United States.
Well, I'll just finish my point, and then we can get onto that. We don't want to lose that. Basically, there was a guy called Barry King way back in 1984 who talked about actually working in a British base in the Berkshire countryside, and in that British base there were reptilians and greys, and the Americans and the Russians and the Germans and the Nazi Germans and even the Canadians. and they were making programmed generated life forms.
Okay.
And another little birdie said they were making that for, quote, the lunar base. This is in England.
Right. It's an international cooperative effort.
Yeah.
I mean, even though the National Security Agency landed on the moon in 1953, we have a base at the northern pole, which is called Cape Malabar. It's called Cape Malabar Radio is the name of it. I don't know why it's named that, but
well, anyway,
that's what,
let's get on to so that's basically why it's called a bases. They interviewed this thing. We're making aliens in the British countryside. Boscombe Down, Porton Down make a lot of this stuff. There's a huge involvement in the underground British bases. You got the German scientists, rocket scientists. The Russians got the Russian-German rocket scientists, Nazis.
Right.
We got the National Health Service, which was run by that. And we got the DVD, which is secret German intelligence, and they operate British government through the Cabinet Office.
Right.
So that's why it's called bases, because I started talking to somebody who was in the bases.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And that's why it's
well,
called.
then supposedly the really smart German scientists all escaped and went to Antarctica, but that's a whole other.
Well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, what they're
so,
doing.
okay, Sean, you've got a heck of a lot of background, and just while we're finishing off here, and this is your book.
Oh yeah,
or a book
that came out today. It came out today.
Well,
it dropped. It's already been optioned for either a major motion picture or a TV series, and so you can go on Amazon right now. Go on Amazon, look up that book, and you'll be able to get a copy.
Well, actually, every time somebody says Amazon, I tell people to go and buy their books at the Devices Bookshop, which is a wonderful lady in the local bookshop here, which is in a fantastic old building. The town here goes back to Oliver Cromwell, 1600s. Everything around here was built in 1600. They only reopened the canal here in 1990.
Okay.
Closed for about 60, 70 years.
Everything built in the 1600s. Does that include you, Miles?
No. I was built a lot before that, for Christ's sake.
In a top secret base somewhere under Stonehenge.
It's not a top secret base because it's so secret you don't even know about it.
I know. Yeah,
you know that's one of the things that John Lear said about Bob Lazar. You know when they gave you all that top secret clearance, Bob, it meant you weren't meant to tell everybody about it.
Well,
the late John Lear.
Bob Lazar never. All right, well, that's a whole other thing. But Bob never actually saw what they were doing is they put him on a workbench with an oscillator, and he was not to greed. He was not any kind of advanced scientist whatsoever. They basically took what they consider one of the dumb guys, and they put him on an alien reproduction vehicle to see if he could back engineer it or do something with it. And of course, when he couldn't, he only worked at. People forget that Bob only worked at Area 51 for 16 days. Between December and May, he was being called in. And then supposedly his clearance was revoked. According to him, his clearance was revoked because they found out his wife was having an affair with her flight instructor or something. Whereas in the original story, when we interviewed Bob back in 1990, and it's so funny because we're still talking about stuff that I investigated and, majorly dove deep into back in 89 and 90, when we exposed all this stuff, and now it's become part of the entire consciousness of what we're doing. But supposedly Bob was taken in, he was beaten up by this Captain Dennis Mariana. And after he got beaten up by this guy, he drove over to John Lear's house. And it just so happened that Bill Cooper and George Knapp were actually at John's house interviewing him. And that's when they got the famous car interview with him blacked out. But of course, they didn't disguise his voice. And so the next day, he got a call from this Mariana guy who said, "You have any idea what we're going to do to you now? Now that you're coming out about this stuff?" And primarily the reason he got in trouble is because he got caught out there taking John Lear out on a Wednesday night out to the Tickaboo Valley to watch the UFOs fly around. And when we interviewed Bob, Bob made it very clear. He said, "Look, you don't have to believe anything I say. You go out to Highway 375, now named the extraterrestrial highway, thanks to all of us going out there." And he says, "You go out to the mailbox. Steve Medlin's got a ranch out there. And you go out to the mailbox and you'll see UFOs they test on Wednesday nights." Now that's an interesting corollary because my father, Captain G.T. Morton, was a fighter pilot, naval aviator in Korea. And when he was an experimental test pilot, just like the Top Gun Maverick thing and all that stuff. But he says you got your mission parameters on a Monday. You had nuts and bolts on Tuesday where you went over the craft with various engineers. Wednesdays when you flew, because that was when they thought you were at your best. Thursday was debrief everybody, and then Friday was for either barbecues or funerals, depending on who survived that week. So it's interesting that they put the same schedule together at Area 51. And my theory was that I think that somebody like Bob Lazar was released into the wild as part of a kind of a co-Intel Pro sort of thing. And I mean, why were they flying? All right, so we're a bunch of civilians, and we go out there and we've got UFOs flying over our heads. I mean, these things are not very high. They're 100 to like a couple thousand feet up, and they're zipping around in the valley. They've got right on the other side of the Bald Mountain. They've got a military ranch that's 3 times the size of Switzerland. Why aren't they testing stuff out there? Why testing it over our heads? And apparently the deal is that Area 51 has nothing to do with our military, has nothing to do. The people at Nellis Air Force Base have no idea what's going on there. And they got tired of having to explain these weird, I mean, now they're calling them
UAPs.
UAPs to make it sound all fancy, like they're not UFOs.
Well, that's another thing, because the CIA wants to control the narrative on that.
Oh, well, that's what I'm saying. What Area 51 was. Now everything was moved. I mean, the thing at 5-1 was very simple. There's different. The Area 51 space itself, where the actual runway is, the 7-mile runway. That's all Northrop and formerly TRW and Boeing and whatever else. When they asked the commandant at Nellis why they needed another 89,000 acres of land, which they stole in once again in 89. No, it was 87 when they brought the saucers in. I think it was Harry Reid said, well, what goes on up there? And he goes, I don't know. And he said, well, you're the commandant of Nellis. And he goes, I know, I don't have clearance to go up there. He says, the president of the United States doesn't have clearance to set foot on there. You had to have I think you have to have a Q-16 clearance, which they just handed Bob Lazar out of the blue. The theory was that there was a ship they tried to crack open and it blew up and it killed 5 of the scientists. So they just grabbed 5 of the first guys they get their hands on. And I don't know if they had the good luck or bad luck to basically go with Bob Lazar. But I read his book, Bob Lazar's book, Dreamland, and thinking to make it into a movie. And it's completely different from what he actually told us back in 1990, which was just a whole different story. I mean, there were aliens and mind control and all kinds of crazy stuff. And in this book, it's just like, oh, I went to a job and weird stuff happened, and then I got fired. And that's the whole point of the book, which is not how it went down. Anyway, so everything got moved to their brand new base, since we're talking about bases, is in the Uinta National Forest in Utah, and it's underneath a gigantic mountain called Kings Peak in Utah. So that's where everything's been moved as far as I know. Now, I do not know whether or not the Dulce, New Mexico base has been re-inhabited or not. I know it was
there's a very interesting book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's pretty recent. It's by Elena Danan. Familiar with her?
I haven't heard of it yet.
She's a French archaeologist turned druidess turned being given permission to release a whole pile of very accurate drawings of aliens of all different types.
Oh.
Basically, I've got the book here somewhere, but
well, it sounds like a girl that wants to party. We should party with this guy.
Yeah, well, she's French, and she's living in the extreme southwest of Ireland in Dingle, which is where they shot the Star Wars. Star Wars was there. When the Disney Star Wars was there. And that's a very important area because of the proximity potentially with the eastern side of Atlantis and a place called High Brazil, which is an island which physically materializes every so often. It's on old maps and things. Anyway,
well, it's the location that they came just off that area. That's the location that they boiled down to the longitude and latitude of some kind of gigantic alien base from the Bentwaters incident. The guy that touched it, and then all the stuff came into his head, and he figured out where it was.
There's interesting. This while we're bouncing around subjects here, it's interesting, but the Bentwaters, Rendlesham Forest, Woodbridge Bentwaters Twin Base. They had a space rescue team there to, in the event that there was a crisis with the launch, and they had a base. They were stationed there to go and recover, because that's the first sort of dipping point. It's the first bit of land really, which is friendly, I suppose.
Right.
And they have over the entire. The shuttle could land there if it had to. That was the whole point of the Woodbridge runway. It was as far as far east as you could get in England, and bombers coming over from the raids, and a lot of them crashed there because even before it was open.
Right.
So that was known. That was one of the main. It was also the base used for the Gregory Peck movie, 12 o'clock high.
Okay.
Which is an expression that bandits 12 o'clock high.
Right.
And he but that I don't want to lose a bloody point here. The point
Yeah, I was
is
kind of looking for that. What is the point?
the point is that the space rescue team over the
Okay.
entire era of the space shuttle, the Apollos, everything, the
Right.
only actual mission they did, which was a live mission, was to recover a ship at sea, which is always useful for a ship to be,
Right.
in that place that you just talked about. It was in
Yeah.
trouble. And rather than just get normal lifeboat people out there, they got this team from as far east as you could get in the British Isles
Okay.
to get down there and help with that incident, which is about 300 miles southwest of Cork.
Interesting.
And also that region had a lot of big, very big craft coming out of the sea, all around, flying all over the place around that area. Dingle, Kerry, that area, right about in the early 1990s. And an astronomer in Ireland was key investigator to that, and he's called Eamon Ansborough, and he does quite a lot of stuff, and he's now head of this new UFO group called ICER, International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, which was formed 18 months ago.
Okay. I'm not up on all this stuff. I think.
Well, they've just formed themselves. A lot of people launched that 18 months ago. So
I mean, I still think MUFON stands for morons ultimately finding out nothing, because they never do.
now, that's a dreadful thing for you to say. And
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make people angry.
No, you see, what you Americans don't get is if the British are going to do it, they're going to do it with better class.
They do.
Better accents, right?
Absolutely.
So we have the British UFO Research Association, which was an esteemed organization like MUFON, which goes way back to the early 1950s or whatever it is. And after 40 years, they just gave all the research away to some guy in Denmark. Were there any positive conclusions about anything? None of these UFO groups have come up with anything.
Well, then you had CUFOS, which was basically completely run by the CIA. But
that's the Center for UFO Studies.
All right, Miles. So let me put a question to you, to your big giant head, your massive brain. Why control the narrative? I mean, what is the point of governments, other than the fact that governments are supposed to be in control? Other than the fact that if you tell them there are beings out there that are coming from other dimensions, other planets, they could roll over in their sleep and wipe us out if they wanted to. Or are we just an experiment? I mean, and what is the narrative they're trying to control? Area 51 seemed very straight up that we had captured ships, got them in some kind of deal. We were testing them, but that we also had a captured alien down at level 5, which is, if you look at we're doing another documentary on the alien interview case, because nobody's come out after 25 years. Nobody's come out to debunk it. Nobody's come out to take responsibility for it. It would have cost at least $250,000 to $350,000 to fake it. And
now, is that the one where you have the Irish nurse?
No, I don't know. No,
it's some kind of interview that she was involved with interrogating a Grey, and she was in the American forces or a nurse.
Oh, you're talking about Matilda? No, you're talking. That is another thing, but that did come out of Roswell. That was kind of a robotic creature of some kind that called itself. It was a female, supposedly, that called itself Ariel. And it's a fascinating book, and it was written by she was the secretary to General Twining, and it was kind of funny because I went to school with General Twining's grandson, Jamie Twining. we used to be invited over to the Twining household for all kinds of stories and Thanksgiving and all kinds of stuff. So got a lot of interesting aspect of that. Of course, my dad later became the public relations director for TRW, and so I grew up with all the astronauts. Like I mean, I have 2 godfathers that walked on the moon, and Gus Grissom was like my second dad, and so I grew up with all these people. So, and they were all in on it. They kept saying that the space program is basically it was a PR game, that they were just spamming a can, and that the real stuff was happening at Area 51, and Pine Gap in Australia, and Alice Springs in Australia, where they now have apparently the only other bigger underground, since we're talking about bases now, the 2 biggest underground cities on Earth now are Alice Springs and Yamanato in Russia. And it was interesting that just recently you had a couple of evacuations of a bunch of leaders and population, whatever, into the Yamanato Russian complex when, it was looking like we were possibly going to go Popeye and Pluto with like nuclear weapons over Ukraine. But again, I would not put it past the New World Order because they'll do anything, because what we've done, or what they've done unwittingly, is that by Putin taking on Ukraine, he's kind of cut off the head of the dragon. And then they did it to themselves. They cut the balls of the dragon off, which is how they finance all their nefarious activity through Afghanistan. And that's when you take, and now the Afghans are burning all the poppy fields. Exactly. This is what triggered 9/11. This was what triggered the war and everything else, was the Taliban burning the poppy fields in January of 2001. And we moved all our troops into Pakistan in August. And then suddenly, magically, 9/11 happens. And, oh, yeah, bin Laden's in there. And the Afghans said, well, we give him to you if we know where he was. And so then we invaded. But it's you take 100 billion cash off the world market, and people notice and people care. And with the New World Order actually taking over the government of the United States now, and they're, it's very short lived. But remember, they blamed Putin for Trump being elected. And it was inevitable that the New World Order was going to have to go to war with Vladimir Putin. You can't have a leader of a country saying, I will strangle the New World Order with my bare hands if necessary, and having Nathaniel Rothschild call him out as public enemy number one. But this is not the UFO stuff.
Well, I think it all connects into that. I mean,
well, Putin did say to Trump, let me just quote you this. I don't know why nobody's putting this up somewhere, but he had a conference with Trump, and there's Trump standing at the podium, and it's being translated. And he said, President Trump, I beg you, before you leave office as president of the United States, you must tell the world the truth about 9/11. That's the first thing he said. And the second thing he said was, and you also must tell them that we're currently in contact with 27 alien races, 3 of which are trying to destroy us. That's what he said in a conference. And, then you have Nathaniel Rothschild calling public enemy number one, and all he's really doing is trying to take back the Russian part of Ukraine, which is the Donetsk region, but that's a whole other thing. So, but we did come fairly close to a war that the Russians said would last 200 seconds, and they're right. And the death of a couple of billion people.
It would happen here. I mean, I think 3 weeks ago, I was told if anything happens, just duck, just get on the ground, because if they would be taking out London, Southampton, and that's where the Royal Navy has a lot of their stuff.
Right.
And it goes way into the inner parts of the UK or England for their submarine pens and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's all very sneaky.
Then you got Scotland, which with a heck of a lot of nukes up there, which allegedly they were all about a year and a half ago. I don't think I'm talking out of school here, and who cares if I am? A lot of those nukes were exported to the Ukraine.
Okay.
But we've got the Bentwaters incident. We've got the Russian nukes being neutralized just like that. So really, are the nukes? Well, that's what Putin's saying. These so-called Satan missiles could get here hypersonic speed. You wouldn't have time to operate anything to defeat.
Well, it's not like taking on these third world, fourth world countries like Iraq. I mean, you get in a fight with Russia, you've been in a fight. So we're pissing off a nation with 6,000 nuclear weapons. You will notice that the government, the current insane government of the United States. I can't say that. I'm sorry. I cannot say they're insane. You cannot say these people are insane. You cannot say they're stupid. There's a very specific plan in place here. There's a reason why they took out our attorney generals. There's a reason why the streets are turning full of crime. There's a reason why inflation is, because look what's happening. It's the Weimar Republic. I mean, it's all over again. And what was at the end of the Weimar Republic? I'm sorry, the Nazis. Some guy named Adolf Hitler. Yeah. And it makes me nervous when you have people, kind of worshiping Trump like he's Batman come to save Gotham City, when at the same time he did some good things. But, I've been at odds with these, the mega Trumpers, because I'm like, look, he could have been a hero. He could have done all kinds of things, but he didn't. He just walked away. He was lazy and he wants to. And no, I don't know. I'm not sure he's even going to run for president again in 2024.
Well, there's doubts about that.
He's already saying my health is not good, and they're going to put in Ron DeSantis instead. He's the governor of Florida for those people in England.
Yeah, well, it's worth mentioning things like that, slightly qualified.
So what do you want? Which part of the UFO stuff you want to talk about? The beings that they grow in the bases?
We've spontaneously covered a whole lot of stuff involving Nazis, secret agents, aliens made here rather than there. false flags, Antarctica. No, we didn't mention Antarctica. I think we
We
mentioned.
did mention it because I said the Nazis all went to Antarctica,
Yeah, we
to the
did.
center,
We did
the
mention it.
ice-free region in Antarctica, and that's supposedly what Byrd went down to go look at. It was very interesting because Byrd went down with like 1,800 troops and early versions of
I don't think people
aircraft carrier.
realize how big the task force was.
It was a big deal, yeah. And the Chilean newspaper asked him, "Why are you taking all the troops?" This was not 48. I mean, it was sometime early in the 1950s, where they said, "Why are you taking all the troops?" And he said, "We go to meet the enemy across the ice." And the Chilean newspaper said, "Well, who's the enemy?" World War II, the Nazis have been over. And he said, "No comment, no comment." But he had a bunch of his planes shot down at the same time. And then it just depends on which story you believe. Did he find an inner Earth? Did he go into the inner Earth? Did he meet with a bunch of Nazis down there? I just think it's weird now that if you look at all these gigantic international meetings, they're all taking place on Rothschild Island in Antarctica. Why are they all going to Antarctica? And what are they doing? And is there the theory here is that there's a third path of humanity, and that, you've got the first, second, third worlds, if you will, but there's like world zero, I suppose, where they've developed technology, they've moved out into other planets, and they're kind of keeping the balance of the equilibrium on the planet, that they would stop nuclear wars or nuclear catastrophes. Already, by the way, NASA has tracked and documented there was a huge coronal mass ejection that was going to hit the Earth. And when the coronal mass ejections come in, you have the center part of the planet, and when it comes in, it bifurcates and it goes up to the top of the Van Allen radiation belt to the bottom, which is, by the way, I mean, if you look what happened on Australia, the Aborigines actually have stone records of a CME like this wiping out everybody on Earth. I mean, there was only this was actually in 14,400 BC. And they claim that it killed everybody on Earth with the exception of maybe 4,000 people, and that we're all descendants of those 4,000 people. But
this is that some people are talking about the sun going into a nova. The sun novas every so often, and that blast just hits us.
A couple billion years.
There's other people who suggest it happens on relatively regular occasions.
NASA put out a thing that basically said that there was some kind of mysterious shield, a shield that actually came up from the North and the South Pole, that actually, as it was coming in, it actually punched at the CME and drove it away and spared life on Earth as we know it. Now, you can look this up. It's on.
I mean, are you
NASA's
familiar
webpage.
with what the Russians talk about the Tunguska event?
Yeah, there's a zillion.
Where there's an Earth defense system there which shoots things down.
Well, it's not only an Earth defense system, but the possibility that Tunguska was actually, if you read, there's a book called Morning of the Magicians, actually, and their contemplation was that Tunguska was basically an above ground test of the first nuclear weapon. This is back in 1908, and that they had nuclear weapons back that far, but they just didn't develop them or what have you.
Well, there's a guy called Valery Uvarov who explained
him I've heard
of. That were three events, two further uses of this weapon system to shoot down anything that's going to be toxic to the Earth.
Okay.
And this is some kind of ancient defense system which is running out of ammunition, and is based insofar that we need to contact, because there's something coming in around about in about 75 years now, and they know that's incoming, and they don't have enough to stop that from happening. But that's another whole thing. But this Earth defense system was responsible for Tunguska, and another operation of that system in early 2000, around about January, there was a similar device happened, airburst 80 miles up, loads of trees flattened.
Right.
And another version of that was when the taxis in eastern Siberia somewhere, you saw something coming in, but the point was something intercepted it.
Right.
And blew it up, and that was, factory lost.
A violet beam or something.
Whatever.
So, all right. So let me see. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, right. We've danced around a few things. The main thing is you've got a lot of stuff here. You've written lots of stuff, and you didn't find that out by dreaming it up. So you've done your own research. Tell us what you have done, and try to tie all the bits together to the present day. And I'll keep quiet.
Oh. It's MI5. They don't want me
No,
to
we don't
talk.
have to blame MI5. That's a military intelligence operation. A contradiction in terms. Well, hello, Sean David Morton.
Hello, sir, Miles. It's lovely to see you by your lovely Love Canal River there with
It's
filled with alien
it's
bodies.
sometimes it's got a few in there. Well, from the great lands of Wiltshire, also the lands of crop circles, underground bases, secret underground town. Some of Britain's secret bases are here. Good few reptilian things, all sorts of stuff. Alleged crashed craft near Avebury, still underground, still operating. That's where we have this wonderful canal behind us, and the top of that is that's one of the longest races of locks in the history of canals. So, having a cup of tea, and you have got an immense array of absolutely brilliant things. Well, we can actually use that from part one for the initial record, but you've got a heck of a lot of things that you've done, and you know a hell of a lot. You know the inside of a lot of things. So tell us all about it.
Okay, so how I came to be familiar with this is that in 1989, my uncle, Dr. Fred Bell, which is knowing Fred my whole life, it's very much like an episode of Rick and Morty, because Fred was just this crazy, hard drinking scientist who we built a time machine in his backyard when I was in college, and it worked like twice, which is very strange. And so we were hot on, because your show's called Bases. We were hot on basically discovering the Dulce Archuleta Mesa base in northern New Mexico, which of course you're familiar with. So we had a bet going, which was interesting. There was a very evil guy, in my opinion, named Bill Moore, and Bill Moore made his money off of he did a bunch of research for the Bermuda Triangle. He was working with Charles Berletz, the language guy, and he then turned around and said, "Well, I made up Dulce. The whole thing about Dulce is fake. I made the whole thing up. I released it into the UFO community to show people how stupid UFO researchers could be." Well, we took offense at that. So what we did is that with myself, Dr. Jim Delatoso, and Paul Shepard, Joe Randazzo, this group of people, we went out to Dulce, and we got permission from the Apache chief to climb all over the mountain and, run all over the place. And what we managed to do is Dr. Delatoso developed, I'm trying to make this short, Dr. Delatoso developed a ground penetrating radar that was actually really revolutionary, because it shot ultrasonic frequencies through it, and it created a data table like a slice of bread. Then it went through 75 hours of Cray supercomputer time out of the University of San Diego, and it put all the lobes of the pieces together, and there was the base. I mean, it was right there, and it had a nuclear pile at the center. It was being cooled by a ginormous man-made lake that was actually put together by the feds on the other side of the mountain, which was supposedly some development for the Apaches or what have you. But this is also where the cattle mutilation phenomenon, this is where Linda Moulton Howe got involved in this, because she wrote her famous book, Strange Harvest, which won some awards and what have you. So Linda was all over it. And, Lynn and I had been friends for a long time. And then after the Dulce thing happened, which was interesting, I then got offered a documentary by Joe Randazzo. So we traveled all over the world. He had about $350,000. And we went and talked to everybody. I mean, we scientists, contactees, researchers. Somebody had a dog barked at a UFO. We went out and interviewed these people. So we put together almost 600 hours of videotaped interviews of people that had been to the other side of the wall, and people who had been to Disneyland, if you will, and brought back the shirt and the toy and the button and the whole thing. So and we went all over the place. Went to Billy Meyer's farm in Switzerland, up and down Italy. Went to England. We were in the fields, actually, right where you are, around Stonehenge in May of 1990. No, I'm sorry. No, it was 80. I'm sorry. It was 19. Okay, that's not right. It was 89. So we came in 90, and we were there in the fields when the original crop circle phenomenon began. And then it was just circles. And we would look up in the sky, and you would see these, they called them amber gamblers. And they were these football-shaped lights that were zipping all around.
It's actually one of the hills is called Golden Ball Hill.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's meant to be an interdimensional gate. There's a portal there on what we call Eastfield.
All over the place.
And it's a lot of very strange temporal anomalies in the place as you drive around. That's actually where I live. So wonderful place.
Well, there's UFO lore. Well, the one thing that I think I learned the most from having gone and talked to everybody, that made me at that time probably the top UFO expert in the world, because I talked to everybody and nobody had ever talked to anybody, and we just went out and did it. And the thing that struck me was that you would think that there would be some common thread, Miles, that would tie all this together, and there's not. It's like they don't have a. I mean, like not all these beings believe in Jesus, or not all these beings believe in God, or not all these beings have a. They don't even have a matching cosmology of the universe. I mean, you get so many different sides and angles. Of course, it's kind of like going to a political convention where you're trying to get. Well, what does everybody think? Well, everybody doesn't think the same thing. But I mean, I think we probably researched about 100, 120 different alien races that were having different interactions. I mean, you had first you had the abductions, then you had the willing abductions, which would be the contacts. Then you had a woman who became a very close friend of mine, Alice Haggerty, who had probes in her head. I mean, you could see the probes sticking out the roof of her mouth, and she was being used as a broodmare. Basically, she's being taken up and impregnated, and it was her that was actually breeding a half-breed race of aliens and ETs, which was an interesting balance, because if it was too alien, I guess it died, and if it was too human, if it didn't have love or human contact, the experiment would die. But
isn't that why they have to bring the mother of these beings, so they have that contact for a brief period of time?
That's exactly what they did. They would take Alice up on the ship. They would give her a scan or an exam, and then one by one, the Greys, actually the small guys, would hand her a baby, and she would then take the baby, coo over the baby, nurse feed the baby, whatever, and then they'd take that one away and then start another one. But they would bathe her in this this pinkish beam, this rose-colored beam, and that beam was somehow recording her overwhelming feelings of maternal love, I guess, and somehow managed to play it back like a tape recorder, if you will. So, but it was a regular occurrence for her to be impregnated and only keep the fetus for 3 months, maybe 4, and then have it be aborted with, on the ship, but with no damage to her body whatsoever, which then led her to never being able to see doctors, because she'd come in pregnant. Next day she wouldn't be pregnant, and no sign of her being pregnant, which led the doctors to completely freak out and, throw her out of their offices. But the person who commanded the mission, and this is one of the more interesting cases, was a Mayan Indian, 6'6" Mayan Indian that they actually took from out of time, because the Mayans understood the galaxy and the flow of time and the warp and weave, if you will, of something of evolution. But I always thought it was interesting that they had a human commander. Now, the Dulce thing got more interesting, because one of the things that I introduced from the footage that we got from inside the base, which you may or may not have seen, but it's a security camera up in the corner that's just moving back and forth, and you see them actually growing these beings, these creatures that were actually on the base. You see on the one far wall. Have you seen the footage? Have you ever seen it?
Well, I've seen versions of it in the old. Without that amazing, I got a lot of them. I went to one of the first UFO congresses, and I managed to get a lot of American cassette tapes of stuff. But there was the Japanese TV reworking of that.
Yes.
And then there was the actual footage. And I've got Matrix 1, Matrix 2, Matrix 3, 4. Those are the groundswell of really. That's the sort of stuff they'll be doing in this country. That's the Peasmore base.
Right. Well, okay. So at Dulce, our theory is that, again, I think I'm the only one that actually has, because I think I gave it to the Japanese.
I mean, is that available? I mean, can you send that as a file?
I have it. I mean, I just got to get it. Matter of fact, it's sitting right here. So, and it's actually got the Japanese TV show, and then it's got the actual footage. And what people don't realize is that piece of footage, which is only about 30 seconds or so, but it was part of a 19-minute video. And unfortunately, the whole video was destroyed, but because it was at Jim Delatoso's house, and I think he got flooded out or something. All right, here's what happens on the video. I mean, I think it's monumentous, because I've been talking about this for years, and people have just been saying, "Well, you're nuts," and now we're right to where I'm not so nuts. that camera is going back and forth. Okay, on the far left wall, you have a series of hemispheric tanks of like aquariums, if you will.
Yeah.
And those are growing the beings like sea monkeys until they're about hand size.
Yeah.
Then what they do is they transfer them to a much larger sack, which they're these huge black tubes, if you will, coming out of the ceiling.
Yeah.
And then they're in the sacks, and they grow until they're about fully grown, is about 4 feet high. In front of what you see a control dais, and then you see an oblong tub that has a tube going at a 45-degree angle. Well, that tube is full of cattle blood, and it's one of the reasons why you had all of these abduction phenomena, where you had the mutilation phenomenon.
That's what started my research. That at this roughly 94, this guy came forward talking about this stuff happening in the UK.
Right.
And so this is where this is connecting to our respective governments. They're in the same. But the key reason why I kept researching wasn't about all the alien stuff. It was about the inner politics between the Greys, the reptilians, the other aliens,
right,
and the US authorities and the British authorities and all the other human authorities, and how everybody was stabbing each other in the back, and there was so much inner politics about it. That was the thing which made me think this is actually real. But we're talking a little bitty country called England. You're talking the Dulce base, which allegedly something came out of there quite recently, which is involving the injections people have had. But let's continue with this.
Well, this is where it started and why it started. So what you had is that, to describe the rest of the scene, is you got these creatures being grown in the sacks. There's a hot tub, if you will, of cattle blood. They mix the cattle blood with hydrogen peroxide, and then the creatures themselves, the only thing complicated about human beings is our digestive and reproductive systems. But if you're developing something like a frog or something, it's very simple genetically. You don't need that. So how do they eat? How do they poop? How do they, do whatever? And what they would do is they would take these beings, they would strip them, they would put them in these vats of blood, they would swim around, and that's how they would eat. And at the same time, they would excrete nutrients through the skin, which is why the skin always looked like it was peeling off and why they always smelled like sulfur. And when you were done with them at the end of their life cycle, you basically throw them in a vat, grind them up, and you feed them to the next generation of beings. Now, this is where it gets more scary. I mean, if you can imagine, it's more scary. So suddenly the camera goes, and there's a guy in front of it, actually looked very much like you, but he's called himself Dr. Henry Monteith was the guy's name. And he says to the camera, it's obviously like a secret lab that he's got there, and he's using this camera to record his experiments. And he says, I'm Dr. Henry Monteith, and I'm looking for money from the private sector to develop my revolutionary laser tweezer program, in which I figured out a way to crossbreed common plants with laboratory animals. So what he does is that then he goes through this process. There's a screen where he shows that he's using these genetically neutral mules, is what he calls them, and that they act as a jumper between the DNA of a living creature. And in this case, what he was using an aloe vera plant, actually, and then he was using the genetics of a hamster. I think they had in the laboratory, hamster, white mice, or something. And he showed on the screen how you could put these blocks in, and you could use this laser tweezer process to be able to tweeze these two things together to basically take plant and animal DNA and merge them together. Well, it doesn't sound like much, but when I saw this way back. Well, yes, but here's what it ultimately became. And I was following this all from the beginning, because then he says, so I only need $55,000 from the public sector, which was nothing, even back in 1977. And he said, I only need this much money from the private sector to develop this, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what he does, this is what's crazy, is that using time lapse on the camera, you see him growing this aloe vera plant. And the aloe vera plant, as it grows and grows and grows, it develops these little feet on the bottom, and it has these little like hamster feet. And the whole thing has kind of a fur on it, you can't tell because it's all in black and white, but you can literally tell it's got a silhouette-like fur. But there are buds coming out of the plant that look like the little faces of hamsters with like little teeth and eyes and the whole thing. And it's horrifying because it's Little Shop of Horrors kind of stuff. And then he said, so this is my laser tweezer process where I can crossbreed, the genetics of plants and animals. Thank you very much. Then he goes back to what was already on the tape. and it cuts to another shot of a little being in what looks like a hooded sweatshirt, actually just kind of goes like a little troll or a gnome or something that comes across the front. And that was the end of the tape. So for those people who were laughing at me at the time, there was a story in Omni magazine in 1978, because I used to subscribe to it, and it had a funny cartoon because it had trees throwing apples at people. It was like out of Wizard of Oz, and they were saying that Monsanto in 1978 has now, and you can go back and check all this, Monsanto has now applied for a patent for a process to be able to crossbreed humans or animal DNA with plants. This is where all the GMO stuff comes from. This is where the whole genetically modified organism comes from that day, comes from Monteith doing that. And then Monsanto copywriting it. Now what they're doing is they're taking rat genes and they're crossing it with tomatoes as an example, so that the tomatoes don't burn, they don't freeze, and tomato bugs don't like them. They crossbreed. What else? Tobacco is a big thing, because they took tobacco and they took rat genes and mixed them with tobacco. Now, again, you can get a fish that glows in the dark because they mix it with a jellyfish or something. But I don't have to explain the whole process of genetic manipulation. Now, everything GMO is in your food. We had a ballot initiative here in California to just label GMO food, to just say, hey, what you're going to put in your mouth is part rat, it's part hamster, it's part something else. And they voted it down. Somehow the big powers that be voted down even a labeling process here. So that begins your GMO stuff. And if you look at the GMO stuff and all that, and you trace all that back to now, the vaccine that they've given to everybody worldwide. And oddly enough, if you go back and look at the actual ingredients, one of the ingredients is a chimpanzee adrenovirus, which basically is the wind up for monkeypox, which I think is just funny to say, but it's monkeypox. So now they're scaring you with monkeypox, which is a side effect, which, by the way, the photos they're running are photos from 25 years ago that show some kind of canker or some kind of herpetic deal. So that's the thing that affects us the most. Now the question becomes, all right, why are you vaccinating a global population? Is it to murder everybody? Is it to make them malleable? Is it to we've already got stuff that can knock out entire populations with sonics and ground penetrating radar and all that stuff. So, but that's Dulce. And then Dulce, after we sounded the Mesa in '89, the whole place was evacuated. There were two giant green fireballs that were seen rising up out of the mountain twice in January of that year. One went west, one went east. Then it was quiet for a while. Then people think, and I have no idea now, what it is.
No, but just while you're talking about that, did the Lovejoy Institute is it Albuquerque? Did they do the original so-called alien autopsies? There were aliens brought in there.
Oh yeah. Oh well.
At a nearby base.
From Roswell.
No, from Dulce or from wherever they came.
I have no information on that. Okay. So I don't know. I just know that in Roswell it was interesting because the adjustment of the Roswell story that has to be made is that Roswell was a trap. It wasn't an accident. It was a trap. And we set up a microwave tower, the RX-47 microwave tower.
It was an involuntary donation of technology.
Thank you. And that's exactly what happened. It's also interesting too, because if you look at the planet and you look at where Roswell is and you draw a straight line through the planet, the other side of the planet is Hebron. It's Mount Hebron, which is where the sons of God came down from the sky to interact with Enoch in the book of Enoch. So it's just interesting that those two places are exactly just as
no such thing as a coincidence.
Yeah. And so the thing that needs to be updated about Roswell, after we started doing the atomic testing out there at Trinity and all these other places, what we'd done is we'd ripped open gigantic holes in the time-space continuum.
Yeah.
And these things were coming in from other dimensions, other realities where, we were being invaded. And these things were just flying around like moths around a flame out there. It was crazy. So what we did is we set up this huge grid with the RX-47 microwave tower. And this is all, my Uncle Fred was telling me that he somehow worked on it or knew something about it. So it just so happened that there was a storm that night, which kind of covered their activities. And there were 3 craft that were involved. The one craft exploded and bashed into the other craft. That craft became the wreckage on Mac Brazel's ranch. The craft that crashed into is the one that then crashed outside of Corona. But there was one more ship, which was weird because Philip Corso, the guy who talked about, he wrote his book The Day After Roswell, this ship tried to escape and it pulled I don't know what you would call it, like a parachute, if you will. But this thing went and tried to escape from the crash, and it shot into a time-space vortex, and the thing crashed in the same location 10 years later. And Corso, who knew about this, had related a opportunity where he went to the place where it crashed and apparently had a conversation with the alien. They had these headbands that allowed them to communicate. And Corso relates in his later memos, which people just ignore, that he had a conversation with this other being and that he allowed him to repair his ship and kind of let him go. So that's the whole Roswell thing. Now, whether or not the body from the alien autopsy is from that, and as I said, the survivor seemed to have been this Ariel that had the conversations with Matilda, who was General Twining's assistant.
Are the photo? If there's a bit of video of a sort of a very short bit of film on that. Is that?
Yeah, I've seen it, but it's not. I don't know. Who knows? Whenever
the shorter the clip, the more likelihood it's animated or somewhere.
Can't tell you. The only one I can tell you that's probably that I still think is absolutely real is the alien interview. I mean, the reason it's real is because nobody's debunked it. It would have been the production costs on the whole thing are very high, and after 25 years, nobody's come forward and said, "I did it. I faked it. I did something else." The alien autopsy was weird because when Bob Keviat got a hold of it and sort of shoved me out of the entire picture, he made money off it coming and going. He made money on it.
I thought it was all Santilli and all that. Now, there's lawsuits about this. There's the original magician, who Spiros, what's his name? And if he so much as mentioned, he'll sue. My colleague Colin Wolford was blocked from speaking at the UFO Congress about this, and he'll sue if any of those original pictures are used by anybody.
I don't know how it worked out. I mean, it was like I heard the story originally from Ray Santilli and how they got it, and they were all working for
those two individuals, Spiros and I think that's the name, who has done presentations in London about how he made it, how he got the whole thing right down to detail, and the phone curly cord, introduced lots of whistleblowing fakes into it, so people would then look at that particular thing, which would invalidate it, and then find it did validate it. He's done a whole lot of work on this, and he's a magician, and he made it, and Santilli marketed it. And they came to me at Sky TV initially with the first Elvis Presley part of that.
Right.
And because I was a technical director and could see video versus film, they didn't let me have any look at that until before basically marketed it in this country.
Well, it got sold coming as the real thing, and it got sold going as a fake. So I mean, it's like Bob Keviat was the producer that produced it all.
That's the Fox thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's when we brought in all those guys. So, but they were all working for Volker Spielberg, as a German guy. And
right.
That's a whole long story. You obviously know the story.
Well, only from the perspective of there is a guy in England who worked. He's saying very clearly he faked it. And he's very litigious, and Colin did a thing with Carey. All of that had to be taken down. He does black magic. So allegedly.
Oh, I see.
So I have been led to believe allegedly.
Yeah.
Without speaking without prejudice. Are those enough words to use for not getting sued?
Well, in my books, in my Sands of Time books, let me pump those.
Tell us about your books and all that.
Back up on Amazon. And after doing this massive documentary, UFO Contactees, and then we put together a magazine which we called UFO Library Magazine. And I think a lot of the material was destroyed again in a flood in Joe Rentazzo's house. But there was a man that used to come and listen to my lectures. And this was when I was doing we were doing Coast to Coast with Art Bell and
Art Bell. Love
great Art Bell. So when I got a hold of Art, because we were out at 5-1 out in the valley, and we were seeing these things all fly around, taking video of it, and filming it and all that. And so there was a payphone out in front of the little Alien, which is the restaurant. It's just up the street.
I had a steak there.
Oh, it's good. Yeah,
That's when people were accusing me of being a British TV crew.
Okay. And
Jesus.
so I started going out to Area 51. I started taking all kinds of people out there, Conan O'Brien and Montel Williams, and a lot of famous people. And I took Dean Devlin to the top of the hill, and he said, "So we have alien technology there." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "So if aliens were to attack, this would be our first line of defense." And I said, "Yeah." And that's where the whole idea for Independence Day came from. I was standing up on that hill, looking down at the base. So I found this hilltop that looked down on 5-1,
Yeah.
and which really pissed off the military. And
those are good old days.
Yeah, had all kinds of shenanigans and all that. But eventually, finally took John Lear up there, and John Lear spilled the beans on everything because I specifically didn't want to tell people about the location. So when I interviewed people like Ghostwalker, who claimed to be the assassin, and the guard at Area 51, I knew they were telling the truth because they would describe,
who was this guy, Ghostwalker?
Oh, that's a whole other story. That's Ghostwalker was a guy called himself Ghostwalker. That was his agent name. He carried out something like 61 political assassinations, and he escaped from the base with a big stack of material that some 500 pages that he said would blow the lid off this. Now, we weren't sure at the very end that this guy wasn't an agent, that he wasn't a spy, because first he went to Wendell Stevens, and then Jim Cox, and then he went to Jim Del Toso, and he wound up sleeping on the couch at my house. And basically, this guy was a super soldier, 6'4", gold eyes, had this big scar across his face, looked like Doc Savage.
Yeah.
And some friends of mine called me and said, "You got to watch out for this guy, man. He's a murderer, and he might be after you." And I said, "Well, him and his girlfriend are sleeping on my couch. So what do you want me to do?" And
that's
this
a bit
was
of
when
a problem.
This is when I was working for Geraldo Rivera, and this is Bob Kevitt was at Geraldo Rivera first, and then he came out to Unsolved Mysteries in California, and we were offering the guy like $250,000 for this stack of material, and he eventually just disappeared. He went to Vegas and sent us in all kinds of wild goose chases and whatever else. So anyway, so I started calling Art Bell and saying, "Go outside, man. There's ships heading right towards you." And Art saw it. And Art said, "I want to know everything you know. I want to know everything you know. I want everyone you know." So I basically gave him my Rolodex, and I started putting guests on his show. So I was basically producing the program. And with the array of people that I gave him and said, "This is what you should take. You should."
Was that when it was Radio 2000, before it became Coast?
Yeah. This was way, he was only talking to 5,000 people in the middle of the night on. There's a whole thing about how he got bought by Clear and Premiere and all that other stuff. But
yeah,
basically, I was producing the show, and we put it into we built the show up, and almost 27 million people listen at night over the course of that 10 years.
Did you ever talk to Bill Newhouse?
No.
Yeah, I talked to him way back in 94, 5.
Well, all I did, I was just providing guests and vetting guests and saying this person's good and this person's number.
Well, that's a big deal.
Yeah,
it's a very big deal.
But at that time, it was just radio, and we were just kind of goofing around with it, and so that's why I was a monthly guest on the program, and I was their number one guest from all that, making a.
I mean, is a lot of that still available for many? I
mean, it's all up. I mean, I'm sure they're profiting from it, but I'm still the number one downloaded guest, I think, from Art Bell in the 90s. Because I guess people just wanted to hear that. I mean, I made all these predictions.
The really good stuff there. Now,
yeah. Well,
What about this thing about the CIA last week, 2 weeks ago, saying it's UAPs, independent researchers, people like yourself or whoever, who aren't conforming to what they want to tell people, are going to be arrested and put in jail for being a threat to national security? What do you think about that whole couple of days of hearings last week, 2 weeks ago?
Well, it's already happened to me. I mean, I went to prison for writing these books. And it was
so what happened? Easy. How did that happen? You didn't pay your tax or what?
No, that's not true at all. It's a matter of fact, they had an IRS guy on the stand, and the judge said, "I'm not accepting your testimony because Sean paid. He told you every penny he made over 5 years, and whatever else." And I had an accountant file on my taxes, and I got a return from the IRS after filing all the legal paperwork. And then 6 months later, the IRS decided they don't want to give me the return, and then they demanded the money back, and started clearing out bank accounts, and never talked to me, never did anything. They violated all their own rules to come after me. So
that's a lot of effort to. I mean, I have to say, I'm in a pretty close situation myself. I can't say certain things. But
Right.
what led to all that? You wrote some books about UFOs.
Well,
What's the
because the
big
books
deal?
are because the books were given to me by the guy that used to run the whole program, and there's so much top secret information in those books. He told me, he says, there's 27 different things in these books that they're going to come after you for. He told me that if you do this, they'll come after you. And so this guy was a fan from the show. He saw me as a way to um, impart information that they wanted imparted to the public. And so he was calling me on the phone, going, "You might want to talk about this. You want to see that?" I'd meet up with him at conferences. And then finally, the last time I heard from him was when I made him a bet. I'd written this entire article about Obama and McCain, and that how neither one were legitimate candidates to be president because Obama was from Kenya and McCain was born in Panama, therefore didn't qualify as a U.S. natural born citizen. And so I said, well, because Obama is from Kenya and there are still legal cases out there that are pending, I believe that he's going to find a way to screw up the oath. I said, if he's not a citizen, he's not going to be able to say the presidential oath. And my friend Ted Humphrey was like, "You're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about." So you're telling me the president of the United States is going to get up there and he's going to screw up the oath? I said, "Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. I wrote a whole article about this saying, you watch what happens." So he bets me $100. Now he's at the rotunda. He's actually up on the steps watching Obama screw up the oath because he gets up there and Roberts gets up because he's in on the whole thing. Robert says, "I solemnly," and the whole thing comes out burbly, burbly, burbly. And he calls me on the phone while this is happening, saying, "I can't believe I owe you $100. I can't believe I'm sitting here watching um, Roberts, who he referred to as this pedophile queer or something, and Obama." And got $100 in the mail. Then the next call I got was several months later from these very scary lawyers in Century City, and the very scary lawyers said Ted Humphrey has it's basically a case where Mr. Dr. Humphrey has passed away, or not passed away, but moved on. Is the exact words they use, is moved on. And we've got all this paperwork for you. We've got these big journals that he wants you to have. So I went up there. I had to sign all this paperwork, this non-disclosure agreements, that I simply could not reveal his real name because he's got a wife that lives in Russia. He's got other wives here. He's got kids, and but that I could do whatever I want with it. So what I did was, I, being kind of the screenwriter guy that I am, I novelized these adventures, mostly from when his father disappeared when he was a kid. But the whole thing has to do with basically a very dire alien species that's on its way here, that might actually get here at the end of this decade. And that what they were working on mostly in places like 5-1 and other places was time travel. That the only way they felt that they could defeat what's happening is to be able to manipulate time. So one of the reasons why we had the ships at Area 51 was not so much the power and the element 115 and all the stuff that you heard. We figured that out a long time ago. But what they were concerned with is that if you and I climbed in the saucer and we spent 2 minutes, 3 minutes in the saucer, and the saucer just would go up and hover around the ceiling and come back down, you would see some 24, 25 hours pass on the outside relative to us. So the ships have the power to dilate time. And when you dilate time, you can make everything. So if you and I are in a spaceship and we're cruising along at 90,000 miles an hour, and we make a slow left-hand turn, which just feels like a day out with grandma, the people standing on the ground would see a ship traveling at 90,000 miles an hour, making a rapid right angle turn, which should turn any test pilot into basically jello. And I mean, we had all kinds of stuff where they had the test pilots would have these what they call juice suits, that they have to get into there's water in the suit, and then you breathed in this liquid oxygen.
Yeah.
So that the high levels of the G force. It's very funny because in the beginning of the Top Gun Maverick movie, they've got Tom Cruise. I don't think I'm wrecking everything because it happens in the very beginning. But Tom Cruise is testing an SR-71 Blackbird, which is stupid because the Blackbirds were retired in '74, and they were doing Mach 3, Mach 4, Mach 5, or in the early 1960s. But the fact that Tom Cruise is doing Mach 10 in an old SR-71 Blackbird is really stupid. If they were really doing something good, they'd have him testing a flying saucer. But the Challenger
or
being
TR-3B, no?
TR-3. Well, they're You're way behind the times. They're all up to the TR.
Yeah.
They're all up to TR10s now. You know.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. I know that. Yeah.
well, because the SR stands for surveillance and reconnaissance, and TR stands for terrestrial reconnaissance. So what the TRs do is that they're these big triangles, and they just float out in space, and they just watch everything, and that's because it's all surveillance. But the TRs, the terrestrial reconnaissance triangles, are running on kind of a quantum drive. That's why when you see the big triangle, there's an energy field in the center of the triangle, and what the energy field does, it takes 8 people to man these things, and they got the flaps and the fins and what have you, and then there's the quantum field in the center will bubble up, and then it'll go boop, and it forms a sphere around the ship itself, and then the whole thing will disappear.
So that YouTube footage, which is relative some material, is that real? Then?
Yeah,
there's 2 little fins on it as well.
The one taken in France. It's outside of Paris somewhere by a couple of French kids. But I've seen those. They were up around Lake Tahoe. We got other footage from one around Boca Dam in Northern California. But that's what they are and what they do. Now, the time aspect of it is interesting because the timelines are malleable. But when you change a timeline, you create, people have kind of discovered it, what they call the Mandela effect, because not all people's brains run the same.
Yeah.
So therefore, some people are isolated from a timeline shift or change. The problem becomes is that if you're living a different timeline from everybody else, time is an agreed upon reality. So the asylums are filled with people that are living a different timeline, and they just don't know it. But our timelines have been altered substantially. I'll give you an example of this, which is one of the most outrageous ones. I mean, I asked Ted Humphrey, I said, well, the ultimate time travel question, why should you guys just go back in time and kill Hitler? That seems like the easy way. He says, you think? And he says, because we did it 3 times. And each time the Germans won the war. They said the first time they won it with Rudolf Hess, the second time they won it with Hans Kammler, and the third time there were no leaders and the German high command took over, and they still won. So we had to go back. The only reason the Germans lost the war is because Hitler was crazy, and he decided to not use the weapons at his disposal and decided to attack Russia. Which
there's some people say that they did win the war, and that's what we got right now, the Fifth Reich.
I would agree with that because they were brought over. By the way, since your show is called Bases, one of the major Nazi scientists that you will never hear of was a guy by the name of Dr. Walter Dorsch. And I describe him in the book, but he was the one that basically pioneered the tunnel technology and the digger technology that allows these gigantic underground bases. And Dorsch found a way that when you drill, how to actually harden the sides, because when you're traveling between them, you need to be able to, well, it's a hyperloop. It's exactly what Elon Musk is working on here in Southern California. But with the hyperloop, you had to find a way to actually harden the walls of the tunnels that you were digging. Now,
well, Elon has got access to the British part of those bases in Scotland and in Cornwall and Manchester and all that.
Well, the biggest, okay, so let me finish my thought on Walter Dorsch. The Rand Corporation originally started building these ginormous atomic drillers. And they went from atomic drillers to where the core actually had a nose. It was made of boron, which is like 15 times harder than diamonds. And it would heat up. And then it would just kind of move. It would turn everything in front of it into kind of a soup. And then it would push it away and then freeze it. Then we developed a whole new generation of these things. And they're huge. I mean, you're talking about bore noses that are probably 100 feet across.
I'm gonna say children's TV, Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds, yeah, exactly.
I think Thunderbirds was used as a whistleblower show.
I think it's great. It's a great public show.
Yeah. That's
they had Thunderbirds. They
Thunderbirds
had Stingray.
Yeah.
Remember Stingray, which
Stingray,
is
Fireball XL5.
Okay, I want to be a fireball.
And Supercar was the first one.
Supercar, yeah.
And then what about Moonbase Alpha?
We didn't get that one here in the States. We got Fireball XL5. We got
Space 1999.
And we got Space 1999.
Yeah, that was
pretty
lame.
But
anyway, but I think there's a lot of whistleblowing going on with those shows. And then the next show he did was UFO.
Yes, that's right.
And then Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons.
Wow, you get way more cool shows than So the rest of my sentence being is that, and this is where it gets really weird. In the books had all been written, or I got everything from the notes from 2009. So the books were basically all done about 2012 or so. So I put the first ones out, And then in an interruptus, I had my challenge with my friends in the federal government, and they just pinned a bunch of stuff on me that was just not true. It just wasn't real. I had my taxes done by a legitimate CPA. The CPA had gotten all kinds of money back from people, and they were just mad that I got a return on an investment. Then I was trying to help people fight the banks, and that's what they really don't like. And I was trying to assist people in writing bonds that would allow them to set off, settle, and discharge debt, because the banks are using your credit to basically borrow that money into existence in the first place. And when I point that out and I show a way to actually then say, well, it's your credit in the first place, you signed that money into existence. Why can't you use that same process to get it out? Well, they didn't like that at all. And so if you can imagine this, they never got a single piece of evidence from the banks. They just refused. So these bonds they were claiming I wrote, the banks would not give back because they'd been cashed and already monetized.
If you look too much detail on those, the banks are anyway. That's a difference.
It's
what's going on now.
It's an orgy. So here's my challenge. My challenge here is that in book 4, Time Runner, it's book 1 of 3 acts. And as I said, I hope everybody goes on Amazon and gets these. They've been called. They've got 5-star ratings on Amazon. 95% 5-star ratings on Amazon. They've been called the greatest disclosure document. That's book 4. Okay, there's 3 books before that. Good. I'm glad I got that to you. That's it's very cool. So but they're out. We finally got them. There's been a paper shortage, oddly enough, in the United States, and so they've been delayed for months. I've been trying to get them printed since December. So I've got books 2 and 3 already done. That's Act 1. But here's where it gets hairy. One of the things that you will notice, because we're talking about bases now, the underground bases are approximately 10.6 kilometers down. That's what I don't know why they build them that way. But 10.6 kilometers down. Then each one of these bases is connected by a jet tube, a tunnel that then has a hyperspace link where these craft can go 700-800 miles an hour. You're inside it. They blast you with oxygen and negative ions to put you kind of asleep. And then you go back and forth to these tunnels. Part of the warning in the book, remember the book was written, back in 2009, 2010, is that not only is there an alpha draconian force coming this way, not only is it destroying planets in its path coming this way, but that Earth is we're in a contested area of space, Miles. So when you think about how do I say this? Originally, we had a saurian or reptilian evolutionary cycle where whatever was going to happen, they were going to evolve dinosaurs into bipedal, sort of more humanoid beings. That was all wiped out 65 million years ago. Who knows? Did they hunt them out of existence? Was there the big asteroid? Was the asteroid actually directed here?
Well, there's some people thinking that was only 12,500 years ago.
Yeah, but the reptiles went underground. They went underground and they were evolved by the Alpha Draconians. Now, the mammals went up the trees. That's us. And the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and I guess the Andromedans or the whatever the Andromedan Council is, they were then responsible for the evolution of humanity. Even Harvard scientists are now saying that we began to evolve into what we are only about 600,000 years ago, but that there was some kind of event that then triggered our evolution through that. So when I tell you that we are in a contested area of space, not only have they been telling you this all along and putting it in your face, but I want you to take a look at the NASA logo. If you look at the logo for NASA, and if you look at the logo for
the Space Force.
Space Force.
Yeah.
There are 3 constellations on the NASA logo. The constellation on the top is Orion, which is a conquered area of space supposedly by the Alpha Draconians. The one on the left, there's a constellation on the left, that's Alpha Draconis. And the constellation on the right is the Pleiades, right on either side of the NASA logo. Now, if you look at the Space Force logo, which is now the sixth logo. It was funny because we were at Disneyland and they were playing on Memorial Day and they were playing all the theme songs of all the different military, anchors away, my boy for the Navy. And I think I stepped up and said something like, well, why does the Space Force have a song? Why does she have a logo? And I think some guy was playing a horn, started doing the theme to Star Wars. And I was like, dun, dun, dun. I'm like, that's it. That's the new Space Force logo. That'll be their new song. So here's the challenge. We're in this contested area of space. And by the way, not only does the NASA and the Space Force logo say it, but look in the Bible. If you look in the Bible, we're in the middle of a gigantic extraterrestrial war. And it's the Archangel Michael, who's, I guess, head of the Pleiadians, I suppose, but he fights the great dragon in space, and he's wounded. He wounds his heel or something, and so he takes the dragon and casts the dragon down to the earth. It's not me making this up. This is all.
I mean, this is in the coats of arms, the Britain
right,
coats
right.
of arms, and why the white horse has got a chain
collar,
around it, and all that sort of stuff.
So let's say this is happening. So in book 4, Ted Humphrey warns us and says, well, here's what's going to happen, because he goes in front of the council, and the council are all the scumbags. It's all the royal bloodlines and all that. And you begin to realize that the Bilderbergers and the Davos guys, they're the slaves. They're the maids and butlers.
If you can see them, they're not the real deal. They're the button pushers. The maid, yeah. I think it was described to me as the owners of the manor are coming back to find that the butler's been making a mess.
Thank you. And there's a whole speech that Humphrey gives to the council, saying, here's what I need to protect the planet. I need like $10 trillion. I need it now. And if there's any resistance to this whatsoever, I know where you live. I know who you are. I will mess you up.
That's a Belfast phrase. We say that in Belfast. We know where you live.
Yeah, we know where you live and mess you up. So, and he says, if you think you're going to escape, what's going to happen before the Alfdraconians get here is that the I don't know what you would even call them, the Saurians, the Reptilians, or the Silurians, or whatever.
See, there are various. Those names are in Elena Dannon's book, and 4 of the aliens in that book have been identified by independent witnesses, including the Alpha Draconis, who are dealing with the Masons here now.
Well, they're destroying our underground bases. They're attacking the underground bases from underground.
Yeah.
So what you will notice is that over the course of the last 2 years, there have been a series of 10.6 kilometer down explosions.
We
and
had one blow up just round the corner from here.
But they happen in a straight line. That's the problem. When you look at, one goes here, then what do you have to do? If you destroy this base here, you've got to destroy the tunnel and destroy it, because if they get loose into that system, into the underground, the giant underground hyperlink high-speed system of railroads and whatever else, we're screwed. I mean, we're just spooked. So that's happening, and I've been tracking it because I've been watching each one of these, because you don't have earthquakes happen in a straight line.
Yeah.
But each time they blow up a base, if it gets overrun, they use nukes or whatever to blow that base up, and then they've got to run to the next base and defend that one. So that's happening now. That's in the.
We're talking June 2022 here.
Yes. Yeah. And with the whole timeline being set of whether or not it's your reset or whatever else, they're timing everything with the transits of Pluto, because Pluto is the planet of death and destruction, and it's moving through Capricorn now. And I'm the only one that predicted the beginning of the Ukraine-Russian war as being June 22nd, because that's when Pluto goes into an aspect where it's affecting the United States, and it's going to go through this 4 more times until it finally moves into Aquarius, which will be, the moon being Aquarius and all that, and Jupiter lines with Mars, but that'll be Christmas of December 2024. But everything's being geared right now for every cycle to end, biblical cycles, the Pluto cycles, whatever, by 2025, and having them do some kind of global reset by 2025, all timed to the astrological aspects of what's happening to the Earth. By the way, the one of the thing too, when we were investigating the crop circles right in your area, the big thing that we got was an ET contact that he told me, said, look, next month, this was 97. He said, they're going to go from circles to glyphs. They're going to go to things that mean something. And there was a lot of prophecies. We managed to predict a lot of very interesting stuff from those. And his statement was that there was a gigantic reptilian base under England. Yeah. And that maybe the Queen and everybody else were just there's a lot of them around here. The hand puppets for the Alfdraconians.
Well, if you've mentioned these previous books, okay, this is the 5th book, 4th book.
That's the 4th book. Yeah.
Okay, that's the 4th book, but it's called Act 1. So what are the previous 3 books? There's quite a few titles here.
Book 4.
Let's mark this.
Book 4 in Sands of Time. First one is Sands of Time. Second one is Sands of Time. Third one.
Okay. Sands of Time is 4. What's the third one? Right.
Third one is the Isomer Protocol, and that's all about basically how we were isolated to Earth and how Ted Humphrey basically punched the Andromeda Council in the nose. Protocol.
That's one of the things about this. You don't ask the Ministry of Defense or the Defense Department about this. You ask contract lawyers or patent attorneys
Wow.
about that's that's everything. They like patenting all this stuff.
Okay.
So if you follow that, you'll drill down into where everything else. I mean, what you said about 10 kilometers down. I was on a show with 10 years ago. There were a number of English bases which were blown up.
Okay.
Not in Wales, not in Scotland, but only in England. And that was in Cornwall, Kent, the Midlands, and then the Lake District. In the Lake District, these were all deep underground explosions. They were rapid impulse explosions. In other words, they weren't earthquakes. And that was English bases. But what do you think of one thing I was investigating? I had a man here, he blew the base up. Thule Island, Falklands War. The refueling depot for the German submarines to Antarctica. That's what the Falklands War was all about.
That's the best explanation I've heard so far. I mean, why else would you go down there other than the fact that there's, massive
the
oil
sheep down there?
There's a whole shelf that's got, oil and shale and natural gas. And supposedly it was a whole battle for the natural resources that are off the Falklands.
Well, that was what they got was 400 crates of sentient fluid.
Wow.
And they brought it back to this country, and a lot of civilian scientists. That's another thing altogether. This is a fantastic introduction. We'd like to do a whole pile more. Are you up to
that? Yeah, sure. I'm here. I'm here for you all day, sir.
So we'll get this done. And you're very busy, man. You're on the air. You do a show 5 days a week.
Right. I have. Unfortunately, I've got to slack back out because I have throat cancer, and I'm trying to get that dealt with. So as you can hear in my voice, I tore a hole in my esophagus the other day. So
right.
Yeah, I got to go to the doctor and get it all fixed up. But I'm trying my best to try to do it before I was supposed to be dead last year, so they said I was terminal, and then I wouldn't live.
Well, that's very rude.
Yeah.
Very rude of you, sir. That's very rude.
But the whole point of the Sands of Time, why people need to get it.
November the 2nd, 2031. Messages sent. That's 3 or 4. Does that date?
Well, I'll give you the dates
that's from the future, obviously. 9 years away.
Yeah, process through here. Okay, so Humphrey, in my questions of this, for example, he talked about the whole Y2K thing as an example. And he said, look, it was people like you that made us aware of this. This is back in 96 or something, 97, that made us aware of this problem in the first place. He says, it's not that nothing happened. It's that we spent trillions of dollars fixing the problem. He said, but we didn't fix it. All we did was the incept dates, because he basically said it's because Bill Gates will be the biggest villain ever in the future, because Gates is the one that came up with this piece of shit DOS system.
Yeah.
That basically, and all they managed to do is they kicked forward the incept restart dates from January 1st of 2000 to 2034, January 34 of 2034, and that basically that's
yeah. That was a whole millennium bug thing with 28 years.
Yeah, the millennium bug thing. He says, and they managed to kick it forward to 2034. Now, of interest, at the same time, there's a time code in the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you understand the mathematics of it, where it talks about September 17th of 1934 is what they call the day of appearance, or if you understand the time code of the pyramid, and the day of appearance would be it's like every UFO, every ship everywhere in the quadrant becomes visible for one day. Now, my viewing of the events had to do with the fact that there are, let me give you the facts. There are 3 meteors heading towards us right now that between 2027 and 2029 come within 0.00001 of the Earth. That means basically scraping the outer atmosphere, coming between ourselves
getting close.
And the moon.
Yeah, that's getting.
It's there. You can actually look in any modern day ephemeris, and you can see that these things are coming at us. So NASA.
And how accurate are their calculations? They only have to be 0.0001% off when it hits.
Well, Okay, let me give you an idea. It's NASA put out there for quite some time, and this is my prophecy stuff here, said that on June 1st, just last week, you were supposed to see what they call the boom star, and that there were two supernovas that exploded and kind of combined with each other, and this was in 1638, and that the light of this boom star
That's
was
Francis
supposed to reach
Bacon
the sun.
again. That I think there's something about that in Francis Bacon.
Well, it didn't happen. So, I mean, I even put in a request to NASA that said, you guys calculated this, you put it all out there that we were going to be able to see this. And this will really freak you out, okay? Because I'm not sure if you ever read, Andy Collins is a friend, and he wrote a fantastic book called The Cygnus Mystery.
Yes.
And Cygnus is the swan. And this boom star is supposed to appear on the left wing of the swan. And if you go back, Madame Blavatsky, back in the day, she started Theosophical Society with Manly P. Hall and the whole gang. Blavatsky talked about in the first quarter of the 21st century that there would be a Death Star that would appear in the sky on the wing of the swan. And that when this happened, that there would be a massive culling. The word was culling. It was interesting that you word that farm word culling.
Yeah.
A massive culling of men and animals. Now, if you look what's just happened in China, they just rounded up millions of pets. They just rounded up people's. They went house to house.
I haven't heard this. I haven't heard this.
You haven't heard this?
No, I don't watch the news here.
Well, when they locked up, they locked up
they
Beijing,
locked up.
right?
Yeah, people.
They locked up Beijing. They locked out Shanghai. They had people jump, and they forgot to feed them, along with another 15 million Uyghurs that are out there. And the police went from house to house, apartment to apartment, tore people's animals from their hands, beat the dogs to death with shovels, and then took the cats and put the cats in this big net bag and left them on the street for the garbage men to pick up and throw in the trash mashers.
Jesus.
Millions of animals. Then here in the United States, because we've got some sort of bird flu, which some prisoner caught while he was working with booths, but we've had to kill 30 million turkeys and chickens.
Yeah.
So, and then if you take the fact that pet food is made from mostly wheat grain byproducts, and now you don't have any of that coming out of Ukraine. And the biggest thing is going to be massive starvation in Africa, because the next wave is probably going to be 250 to almost maybe 500 million people in Africa. But that kind of moves in with the whole New World Order plan, because they want to combine the populations of Asia and China and then move them down to Africa, to the equatorial regions, because they think the planet's going to get much colder.
It is. I've got a Professor Valentina Zarkova has the proof of that. It was shown in Nature in 2015, where in a Maunder minimum, we're going to get colder. The volcanic activity is going to go very high. There's two magnetic waves coming from the sun. They're going into opposition, and that's going to cause stresses on the Earth, which will induce a lot of volcanic activity, which will then make it a lot colder.
Well, let's play a game. Miles. You're the king of the world, okay? You're chief of the council. You're head of the Bilderbergers, whatever. You're the stuff. You're the Davros guy.
Yeah.
You're presented all this information. You have ultimate authority. Do anything you want. What do? Would you? Okay, I'm going to ask you. What would you do if you wipe out the population of Africa? Okay, which is habitable because it's an equatorial region.
Well, that's the Sahara Desert is going to regreen. There's a guy called David Dubine who's doing all that. Telling the Chinese knew about this because they have the ancient data going back to the first dynasty. We lost a lot of our information because the Library of Alexandria was burned.
Right.
Or whatever happened.
What do you do? What do you do? You're a planetary leader.
Right. You're planetary leader. There
population.
There are trillions of cubic kilometers worth of fresh water under the Sahara. When the Sphinx was originally built, it was raining. The Sahara was a fully forested, lush area with at least two big lakes in it, and that will regreen. That's where they're going to grow the food. In terms of Northern Europe and America, the latitude where things are going to be able to usefully grow food is going to be southern Spain, and if you go across to the United States, there's not much latitude of growing land below southern Spain in that latitude. So basically the whole of the northern part of the planet is going to be incapable of growing food. So you get rid of that population, you move the people you like to the Sahara, which is why the Chinese have built all those highways and ports and things.
Right.
The other place in the southern hemisphere, which will be a place to grow food and regreen, will be Central Australia.
Right.
So basically,
which is where all the New World Order guys are moving.
Exactly, which you
hasn't
just
had
said.
an earthquake. There's no fault lines in Australia.
Yeah,
hasn't had an earthquake in forever.
Yeah, but there's one problem about Australia. It's full of Australia. That doesn't make me popular.
I didn't mean to step on
You got
your
to me
joke.
there beforehand. Well, anyway, Sean, this is really, really important. We need to get those books in a row, and we'll work out more. We'll put our pennies in a row and go through it. Okay.
Well, the great thing about it is the people that are in the know, like you, people that have studied this phenomenon, for years, they've read the books 3-4 times, because every time you read the book, there's some new piece of information in there. It's very subtle. It's very
there's a lot of stuff when you like that where you've read things 3 or 4 times, then when you read it again, why didn't you see that the first time?
Right. But we actually do in books Act 2 and 3. Not only does it kind of wrap up the whole thing as to how the council decides on things, on how this force coming towards us may or may not be defeated, but it literally wraps up how time works. Not only how time works, because the ability to travel backwards and forwards in time is possible, but then you've got to figure out how you actually change time. And the time change has to do with consciousness. It all has to do with consciousness.
Yeah,
it has
perception,
to do with
perception, consciousness, perception.
If you're looking at time as a wave that's coming towards you on the beach, you run down the beach, you're having a good time, sun's out, surf's up, you jump into a wave. The wave only just opens briefly and then closes up and still hits the shore. That's all you can do, really, as far as changing an event in time, because the mass consciousness, which has a destiny and has an agreement to have certain group activities, if you will, that when you understand that the earth is a gigantic school and you can do anything you want within the school, but everybody has to come back together for the final exams. That's where we're headed. Right now, we're headed towards the final exams. And ultimately, the good news would be that we're coming towards another messianic figure that Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius were sort of a group of the first one, the second one being Christ, and the third one being somebody who, oddly enough, is going to come right from your area. If you look at the angles of the pyramid predicts the exact angle of where Christ would be born. It's within 100 feet of Bethlehem. The second Messiah, or the next Messiah that's coming, if you take the what they call it the Pythagorean Stone, because it's 3, 5, and 7. But if you take those exact measurements and you take them out to the west instead of the east, they triangulate directly at the Sunstone at Stonehenge, showing that the next Messiah is going to be British. It's going to come from England. And so they do it. Well, the first time I was when we were out in the fields, actually in May of 90, the challenge was that I came up with this idea about getting a couple of stopwatches, and you click the stopwatch on the outside, drop it, and then click the stopwatch at the same time. You click the stopwatches. You put one in the center of the crop circle, and you put one on the outside, and time actually runs differently inside the circle.
That is true. We had one in Northern Ireland. It was an ordinary grass, and I was cut off the air from LBC talking about this. The people who saw the crop circle, it was in long grass. They just built a house, and the grass was very high, natural old grass before GMO and all that. They had a big, slightly elliptical crop circle, and every clock in their house lost an hour. Yeah,
it's the time actually runs slower, actually, inside the circle than it does on the outside.
And I know Dr. Simeon Hine has mentioned that. I don't know if you know Dr. Simeon Hine.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's come here several times, and they were making a crop circle. It wasn't any kind of a sort of it's a secret thing. They had a crop circle made with, I think, Ron Russell. Not another guy, but American guy did noetic studies or something. They wanted to see what would happen when the public would look at this thing, so they decided to scientifically make this crop circle.
Right.
So they were making it. There was nobody was going to be fooled by it who were in in the know or anything like that. It was just the general public. So they made this crop circle, but the thing was, it's summer. You've only got 3 or 4 hours max of darkness. This was beside at the A4, and people could see it and all the rest of it. And they weren't going to finish this crop circle, so they had the lookout to make sure to tell them to sit down if somebody came along. People walk their dogs at weird times and horses and stuff, and then the guys inside, look, we need another. I'm not going to finish this. So they got their extra hour to finish making the crop circle.
Yeah.
But the guy outside said, "You've only been in there for 3 hours."
Wow. Okay.
So I think that's more interesting because it's a double. You're making it. You're so-called faking it. And you're going to be the observer making all the scientific experiments to see what the observers are going to be. Yet you're the person who's actually in the time war.
Wow.
It's a double, the way it doubles, if you see it. So it's a so-called hoax, but the science still happens.
It's all there.
That 1 hour extra was given. Okay, Sean, we'll get back to you rapidly.
Well, look, here's the deal I want to make you. I'll get you the books as soon as I can. And as I said, the hardcover books we only have a limited number of because it's a limited edition. So you got to get on it now.
Yeah.
But it comes numbered, it comes signed, it comes the whole thing. My first book in hardcover, The First Sands of Time, actually sells for $4,800 on eBay.
Cheap.
So yeah, cheap, right?
Cheap.
So
I mean, we get paid pounds here. £1 is equal to about $500 million. So we're really rich.
Well, now it is.
Not quite.
But once you get a chance to take a look at the books, I'd be happy to come back on and answer any questions and go wherever we're going, and just hope that and it's thanks to people like you, Miles, that you're keeping the intellectual level up. You're really informing. You're quite mad, of course, but that's wonderful about you.
I'm just sarcastic. And you knew about you. We know where you live. Nobody knows about that.
Exactly.
Anyway,
honor and pleasure to meet you, sir.
Yeah, and we'll do that. And I think we could do a sort of a part 2 so much material here.
Yeah.
And then we do a special on the books.
Okay, that'd be great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Until next time.
Okay, Miles. Thank you. I hope there is one, and we'll have a great time. Thank you again.
Okay,
good.
Good.
Wonderful.
Good.